And during this time period, this was happening, there were some cracks starting to form for me a little bit. Because this was not the progressive, pro-woman, feminist atmosphere that I thought I was going to be in. There was the nurses telling us, this was at the time that Depo-Provera came out, which is the birth control that's the shot that works for 3 months. And I had nurses telling me, oh, make sure that the black girls are getting the Depo because they don't remember to take the pill every day. So they were singled out to get the Depo-Provera because they were too dumb to take the pill every day. So, here I am thinking, oh my gosh, I got into this because I am this great feminist and this is a great feminist organization, and yet I'm seeing, all this racism and all these, the way that they're treating the women, kind of like, cattle, what's going on here. But still there's, that cognitive dissonance, that there's no way that I'm going to start to admit that what I'm doing is wrong. I just wasn't there yet. So, after I'd been a counselor for a while, I was trained to be a medical assistant. There's a lot of turnover in the job that I was doing, just like this worker bee. First of all, you're not getting paid anything, okay? And I think a lot of women probably had a better conscience than I did, and they stayed for a while and then leave. But I didn't. So I was trained to be a medical assistant. Now what that consists of is that I'm the person who gets the patient ready for the abortion. Okay, so she gets changed, she put on her Johnny, I bring her into the room, I get her set up on the table. So it's just me and her. By getting set up on the table, she has to scooch back, she gets her legs in the stirrups, she has to be exactly in the right position before the doctor comes in the room. Because he doesn't want to waste any time. So when the doctor comes in the room, if she's lucky, he might make eye contact with her. Say hello. Okay, this is the doctor-patient relationship that Planned Parenthood loves to talk about. Okay, maybe some eye contact. So he will talk to the nurse. At the time I worked there, they did a quick internal exam. Now they do an ultrasound. So Planned Parenthood's protocol is that they do an ultrasound before every abortion. She just doesn't get to see it. Okay. If you're ever out on the sidewalk and you want to say something to a woman going in, tell her to ask to see the ultrasound. So he comes in, examines her, says he's ready. Okay, my job was to hold her hand if she needed hand holding, keep her calm, make sure she doesn't move. They get a local anesthetic with lidocaine. If they felt like they were going to be nervous before the procedure, they could give them an Adair, which is like an anti-anxiety drug they get about a half an hour before the abortion. But it's just a local anesthetic. And he, as you saw in the video, the doctor inserts the speculum, and he has tools used to open up the cervix. Okay, so he does that, and when it's open enough, depending on how far along she is, he has a tube, he uses an instrument to first scrape the uterus. Okay, so he scrapes the uterus, inserts the tube into her uterus, and there's a machine. Now that tube is connected to a jar. Okay, so it goes from the woman's uterus into a jar. And there's a machine that uses suction to suck out everything in the uterus. Okay? And when he's ready, he'll tell the nurse to flip the switch. And he flips it, and there's just this sound, like a garbage disposal. And when everything is out, the nurse flips off the switch. And it's, I remember just the silence in the room. It was just this moment of silence, and, to me, it was just that moment of death. When I think about it now, it's like, her baby is gone. That life, that child is gone. And the doctor gets up, he leaves, he goes across the hall to the other room. What what we had to do was take that jar, the contents of the jar, and you pour it through a strainer, and then you dump what's in the strainer onto a table with a light, and you're looking for arms and legs, maybe a piece of the skull, maybe a piece of a rib cage, making sure that nothing is left behind so she doesn't develop an infection. Okay. And then all of that is poured into a little baggie, similar to a Ziploc bag. And those baggies are called POCs, or product of conception. Okay, that's another euphemism for baby in abortion clinics. You never say, obviously you never say baby, you never even say fetus, you never say embryo. It's the product of conception or the contents of the uterus. And one of my jobs was to count all those baggies at the end of the day. So same number of abortions, same number of POCs. And we used to joke around and we would call them pieces of children. And we thought that was funny. It's hard to believe, but even sifting through pieces of a human being, I didn't see a human being. My brain, my psyche was so turned off to the humanity of these children that I didn't even know what I was doing. I didn't even know what I was looking at. When everybody is telling you that what you're doing is good, it's moral, it's helping women, and even in the midst of seeing it, smelling it, you still believe it because you don't know anybody who thinks differently. The smell in an abortion clinic is something I'll never forget. Even I hear the word and I can still smell it. It's like you're right back there. You know, in that clinic, we did abortions all the way up to, if I remember correctly, 23 weeks, 6 days. Okay, if I remember correctly. There's one doctor who did it, very well-respected OB at one of the teaching hospitals in Boston. I was a counselor for second trimester abortions, but I wasn't a medical assistant for them. There were just 2 girls who was a medical assistant for the second trimester abortions. And on one particular day, one of the girls was out sick, and I was asked to go to the room to clean up the room after the abortion. And I said, fine. And the procedure room for the second trimester abortions was in the way back of the clinic. This was when we had moved to 1055 Comm Ave, where the clinic is now. So the room for the second trimester abortions was way in the back. You know, she's getting a 2-day procedure, second trimester abortion, with a local anesthetic. Can you imagine the cries, the screaming, the pain? So I walked towards the back of the clinic, and of course it gets very quiet because there's nobody back there. And I just walked to the entrance of the room, and I looked, trying to kind of figure out where everything was. And I look at the table where the woman would have been, and next to the table was a jar. And in the jar, with the arms and legs, a baby. And I stood there, I was in shock. Like I wasn't sure what I was seeing. And you know, it was so awful because it was so beautiful. You know, these beautiful toes and fingers, like this hand, this beautiful baby hand. Like you could almost imagine, you know, what that baby was. And I just backed out of the room, and I left, and I found this girl, and I said, you know what, I can't go in there. And she said, oh my gosh, I'm so sorry, I thought I had taken everything out. I'm really sorry, do you want to talk about it? And I said, no, you know, I want to talk about it. You know, I was so shaken by this. I was so struck by this, and I don't know why. You know, I don't know why that was different for me than those thousands of babies that I'd seen pulled apart before. I don't know why. You know, like I said, I had counseled for second trimester abortions. And what I had told the woman was, okay, so here on the first day, the doctor's going to insert laminaria into your cervix. Laminaria are very thin seaweed sticks that expand, and that will expand your cervix, and tomorrow you'll come back and the doctor will gently extract the contents of your uterus. I didn't know that he was going to go reaching into her uterus and pulling out an arm, a leg, another arm, another leg, and then just reaching in blindly to pull out the baby's skull. I didn't know. And my whole world in that moment was just completely turned upside down. You know, you would think that I would go running out of there and just grab the first person I saw and say, do you know what they're doing in there? They're killing babies. I didn't. No, I went home, and the next day I went back to work, and the day after that, the day after that. I didn't have anyone to talk to. I couldn't understand why I was so burdened by this, why I was so angry, why I was so horrified, that sick feeling I had in my stomach every time I went into work. I didn't understand it, and I didn't have anyone to talk to. You know, I'm going into work every day. Every night I'm waking up screaming from nightmares. I'm anxious. I'm afraid. And so again, instead of dealing with what's in front of me, that, you know, I'm involved in the murder of children, I decide, you know what, I'm not going to work here anymore. I don't want to do social work. I want to be a teacher. So that was my out, to leave. Because if you leave, you're betraying the cause. If you leave Planned Parenthood, you're betraying the cause. So instead, I said, you know, I'm going to leave, and I'm going to go to get my master's in education and, you know, take my life in a different direction. And that's what I did. So I had an out. So I left. I got my graduate degree. I was a teacher. I got married. I had children. And I never talked to anybody, ever. You know, it's not just like, oh, I'm pro-choice, I'm pro-life. This is a part of your identity, who you are as a person. This is like turning your whole world upside down, you know? And it wasn't until just a few years ago, when my first two children were young and my husband wanted to start going back to church, that things started to change for me. Of course, I really did not want to go to the Catholic Church because, you know, the oppression of women was just more than I could handle, you know. The hatred that the church has for the women was just, oh. I wanted to go to the Unitarian Church. Yeah, you know, the Unitarian Church doesn't have the 10 Commandments, they have the 10 Suggestions. I liked that. Yeah. But at any rate, I'm not going to get into all the details of my conversion story, but it was through the church. It was through a wonderful holy priest when I went to confession, and he said, Catherine, he said, don't you know that God loves you? And I just started to sob. No. How could God love me? I killed my own child. I participated in the murder of thousands of children. How could God love me? How could he forgive me? He does. You know, when my first, you know, I just as an aside from watching this movie Hush, what I realized when I was sitting here, I had my abortion when I was young. After I got married, I became pregnant, and I had a miscarriage. My first daughter was born at 35 weeks. You know, like, it just kind of clicked for me what they were saying here today in this movie. Thanks be to God, I mean, she was perfectly healthy and, you know, and all that. But at any rate, you know, when she was little, you know, I used to put on this front that, you know, I was such this great mom, and people would say, "Oh, Catherine, you're such a great mom," you know, and I'd think, no, I'm not. You know, if you knew what I was, you would hate me. You know, I couldn't bond with my children. You know, my son was born, I couldn't bond with him at all. You know, I was so filled with self-hatred, self-loathing. You know, it interfered in my relationship with my husband. This abortion that I had carried over into every aspect of my life. You know, until I returned to God. And again, thanks be to God, you know, to accept the love that God has given me and to be able to share my story with people has really been very healing for me. But, you know, I often think about particular women from the abortion clinic. You know, some of the things I said to them, and that woman that had that second trimester abortion, you know, what did she feel when they were doing that? You know, what did she see it? Did she know what they were doing? You know, did she regret it? You know, is she suffering? I don't know, and I'll never know. You know, I'll never know. And I think that's the thing, you know, as we watch this movie, you know, these people, Planned Parenthood wants to say, women don't suffer after abortion. You know? Or, you know, they'll say, well, women who suffer after abortion had issues beforehand. Well, if that's true, why aren't you screening for it in the clinic? If that's true, why aren't you asking them the questions in the clinic? Well, you're not asking the questions because asking questions doesn't make money. You're not going to get a profit from offering proper counseling. You're not going to get a profit from offering the counseling before they pay for the abortion. Once they pay for it, they're in. Planned Parenthood is in the business of making money. They are not providing a service, they're selling a product. And they're using women to do it. You know, even before 1973, Planned Parenthood, and it's on the internet, you can look it up, they said, oh no, you don't want to, you know, abortion is the taking of a life. You know, they didn't believe in abortion. But what happened in 1973 when it became legal? Oh, we can make money. It's a profit-driven, anti-woman corporation. And there are so many victims of Planned Parenthood in our communities, in our churches, everywhere.